I turned 78 on a Sunday. The house was quieter than it used to be. No grand cake or laughter booming through the halls like when Paul was alive. But that morning, I still made tea in the same blue mug he once called the Forever Cup. Because I refused to let it go, even when the handle cracked. It wobbled on the saucer, just a little, as I carried it out to the sunroom. That's where I like to sit now. Close to the light, close to the ivy curling up the windows, close to the Bible I kept tucked beneath the cushion, where only I knew it lived. That morning, though, the cushion was light. I reached for the spine, without even looking, fingertips grazing air. I paused, leaned forward, searched again, empty. My hands went still in my lap. I stared out at the yard where the maple tree had started to brown early this year. Something felt off. Not just the missing Bible, but the silence around it. At noon, they came. Daniel, my son, and his wife Leah arrived with their usual flair, Leah in her burgundy heels that clicked across my hardwood floors like a ticking clock. Daniel, with his smile that had learned to stretch without warmth. Behind them trailed Ava, their daughter, carrying a shopping bag with rainbow tissue paper popping out the top. "Happy birthday, Mom," Daniel said, kissing my cheek as he passed. Leah swept in with practiced grace, her perfume too sharp for small rooms. "We brought cake," she announced, setting down a box from the gluten-free boutique bakery she always preferred. "You'll love it. It's dairy-free." I didn't ask for dairy-free, but I didn't say anything. Eva handed me the gift bag, eyes searching mine in a way that children sometimes do when they sense something wrong but don't know how to name it. I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." My voice caught, a whisper inside porcelain. Inside the bag was a fleece robe, soft, pale pink. The kind meant for people who stayed home all day. Leah beamed. "You'll be warm when you sit in the sunroom now." There was more. A book tucked beneath the robe. Large print crossword puzzles. No Bible. No words. I reached for my tea again, but it had already gone cold. We sat down for cake. Plates passed around like duty. Leah chattered about Daniel's promotion and Ava's new school counselor. I nodded where appropriate, smiled when prompted, until I tried to cut a sliver of the cake, and Daniel said, "Let me do that, Mom. You shouldn't be using sharp knives anymore." It was small, practically nothing, but the way he took the knife from my hand, gently, decisively, felt like a curtain drawn on a stage I hadn't realized I'd been performing on. I looked to Ava, but she was fiddling with the end of her sleeve, not meeting my eyes anymore. After cake, Daniel stood to stretch. "We were thinking," he said, "about maybe cleaning up the sunroom a bit. It's a bit cluttered, and with winter coming, we figured you might not sit there as much." Leah added, "We already moved some things to make space. The plant stand, the little bookshelf." The little bookshelf. That's where I kept my Bible when I wasn't holding it. I felt the words rise in my throat, ready to push past polite silence, but Leah got to them first. She placed a hand on my shoulder, light but final. "You don't need that old thing anymore, Coraline. I moved it to the hallway closet. You're in a new season of life now. You should be focusing on comfort, not heaviness." "Heaviness?" I repeated. She smiled, not unkindly. "You know, rules, shame, all that judgmental language. It's too much." My son watched me, not speaking, as if waiting to see whether I would erupt or dissolve. I did neither. Instead, I stood up and walked into the hallway. They didn't follow. They didn't think I would. Behind the coats and a stack of board games, I found it. My Bible, wrapped in an old dish towel like something shameful. I pulled it out slowly, reverently, and held it to my chest. They had taken it from me, hidden it, as if it were dangerous, as if I were too fragile to need the words that had carried me through burying a husband, surviving breast cancer, and raising Daniel alone through years of second jobs and second chances. I didn't say anything when I returned to the room. Not when Leah said she'd left the robe folded nicely on my bed. Not when Daniel asked if I needed help down the steps to the garden later. I just nodded, sat down with the Bible in my lap, and waited until they left. When Ava hugged me goodbye, she leaned in close and whispered, "I didn't know they moved it. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked like it carried something heavier than her years. I nodded. "God hears everything, darling, even what we whisper." That night, I sat alone in the sunroom, robe untouched on the bed, cake drying under cling wrap. Bible open on my knees. I reread the passage from Isaiah Paul used to ask for every anniversary. Even to your old age and gray hairs I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. The cross at my neck felt warm again, and I decided, then and there, this story would not end in silence. The kind of unrest I felt wasn't the sharp, jarring kind that follows bad news. No, it was deeper, slow and heavy, like the feeling of stepping onto a frozen lake and hearing the crack but not knowing where it came from. I stayed up in the sunroom until past midnight, tracing the thin edges of old pages, rereading verses that once made Paul weep softly in the pew beside me. It felt like holding a conversation through time. The next morning, I woke to silence again, but this time, it felt watchful. The house bore the weight of something missing, not just the Bible, but the acknowledgement that it had ever mattered. When I opened the kitchen cabinet for my tea, I noticed the sugar jar was missing. It was a small thing, hardly worth noting, except that it had sat in the same spot for 20 years. I found it tucked behind the coffee filters in the lower drawer. That was the second thing they'd moved without asking. Later that morning, I heard Ava's voice in the hallway. I didn't expect her. She hadn't knocked, but when I stepped into the foyer, there she was. Alone, holding a school backpack and wearing a face far too serious for a 12-year-old. She looked up at me, like she'd run away from something, but wasn't sure where to land. "Dad thinks I'm at Lily's," she said quietly. I took the long route. I nodded and stepped aside to let her in. "I'll make toast." She followed me into the kitchen, her sneakers quiet on the floorboards. I moved slowly, listening more than talking. When I placed a plate in front of her, she pushed it aside and opened her bag. There, nestled between textbooks and a crumpled hoodie, was my cross-stitch bookmark, the one I'd kept in my Bible since the year Daniel was born. "I found it on their dresser," Ava said, eyes locked on the table. It didn't seem right. My fingers closed around it without thinking. The edges were frayed from decades of use, and one thread had come loose. Still, it was mine, or it had been. "They don't like that I ask questions," Ava added. "Mom said maybe I was getting too old to believe in storybook things." My grip tightened on the cloth. Eva kept talking, voice soft. I didn't say anything back, but I still pray when they're asleep. That did something to me, cut straight through the weight that had kept me quiet. It reminded me that the faith they'd dismissed as heaviness was the same faith helping this girl find her way through the silence. "I want to keep learning," she said, "but they're throwing away the books with verses, the ones you gave me." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just worry in her face, but resolve, a seed of resistance. The kind no one could plant for you. You had to find it yourself. "You're not too old to believe," I said gently, "and I'm not too old to teach." She nodded, the corners of her mouth twitching with something like relief. We read together for almost an hour, quietly in the sunroom, where the light caught the gold of my necklace just enough to make it flicker when I turned the page. I taught her the meaning of Ruth's loyalty and the strength in Hannah's silence. She listened with her whole body, elbows on her knees, eyes wide. When her ride came, she hugged me quickly, then ran without looking back. I understood the kind of courage she had was better exercised in shadows, not confrontations. That evening, Daniel returned. He came alone this time, stepping inside with the air of someone rehearsing patience. "You left your door unlocked, Mom." I was standing at the sink, rinsing out the tea mug. "I know," I said. "It's my door." He chuckled once, but there was no humor in it. "We wanted to talk about the will," he began. I turned off the tap, slowly. "What about it?" Daniel cleared his throat and leaned against the counter like it was a negotiation table. "Leah's been reading up. There are options to simplify things. Make sure it's not complicated for Ava later." My hands rested on the edge of the sink. Simplify? Just make it clearer who should be managing what. We could move some things into joint access, with me, of course, just to ease transitions. So that was it. The softness of the birthday visit was just the first step. The robe, the missing Bible, the conversation masked as kindness. It was all preparation. "You want access to my estate," I said, steady. His smile faltered. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." He looked down at the floor, caught between push and retreat. "I'm still of sound mind, Daniel." "I didn't say you weren't." "You moved my Bible." "That was Leah." No, that was both of you. The silence stretched thin. I reached into the drawer beside the stove, pulled out a folded envelope, and placed it on the counter. This is the original copy of my will. You won't find your name where you expect. He looked at the envelope, but didn't touch it. You gave up your place when you tried to take my faith from me, I said. You call it heaviness. I call it truth. He didn't argue. He just stood there, blinking like he'd never really seen me before. I'll be contacting a new attorney, I added. And before you ask, yes, everything's legal. Every memory, every transaction, every name. He nodded once, quietly, and left without another word. And when the door clicked shut, I pulled my Bible from the shelf, held the cross-stitch bookmark to the edge of a clean page, and began drafting a letter to Ava. I didn't tell anyone about the envelope I'd handed Daniel, not even Ava when she came again that Wednesday, hair still damp from gym class, and a notebook clutched to her chest like it contained a secret worth protecting. Can we read again? She asked, as soon as her backpack hit the rug. We sat in the sunroom, same spot, same light, but I noticed she'd begun to underline verses, the kind of bold, childlike underlining that left no room for ambiguity. Romans 12:2, she said, flipping to the page, her voice almost proud. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. She looked up at me then, not for confirmation, but recognition. I wrote it on the inside of my locker, she added. Then someone erased it. My breath caught at how small her voice became. After that, they said religion is a phase people grow out of. I placed my hand over hers, careful not to grip too tightly. I never grew out of it, I said. I grew into it. That afternoon, she asked to borrow the Bible I read from, the one with Paul's notes in the margins and my chicken scratch observations in blue ink. I hesitated. That Bible had been with me longer than some family members. But she held it with both hands, like it weighed more than it did. I'll bring it back, she promised. I nodded and kissed her forehead before she left. I believed her. The next day, I received a phone call from a woman whose name I hadn't heard in 15 years. Naomi Teller. We'd shared pews once, back when the old chapel had green carpet and windows that leaked when it rained. She still went to Women of the Word on Thursday nights, she said, and someone had mentioned my name in prayer. I heard you might be having a hard time, she said delicately, the way women of faith do when they mean we're worried, but won't say so outright. We'd love to have you back, even just to visit. I told her I'd think about it, but after I hung up, I sat in the silence for a long while, remembering the rhythm of hymnals and the sting of folding chairs on thin dresses. The last time I went, Paul was still breathing, still reaching for my hand during altar calls, still whispering, that verse was meant for you. That evening, I pulled out my old handbag, the one with the broken zipper I'd tucked away years ago. Inside it, wrapped in a faded church bulletin from 2009, was the letter Paul wrote me for our 40th wedding anniversary. I hadn't read it in years. Coraline, it began, you taught me that believing in God isn't just about sermons. It's in the way you fold laundry, the way you sit with grief, the way you hold on to truth when it doesn't clap back. I folded it again carefully. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from memory. The kind that feels alive again for a moment before it disappears. The next morning, Leah showed up unannounced. She didn't knock, just rang the bell twice and opened the screen door like she had a key. She didn't, but the motion said she thought she should. I brought you something, she said brightly, holding up a reusable shopping bag. Inside were scented candles, a new journal with gold foil lettering that read Manifesting Joy, and a small potted succulent with a tiny sign that read Let Go and Let Flow. I looked at it all, then looked at her. What is this? She didn't falter. We thought you might want a little positivity around. You know, some mindfulness tools. I almost laughed. Almost. You mean since the Bible's a bit too outdated now? Her smile tightened. That's not what I said. No, I agreed, but it's what you meant. She placed the bag down gently on the kitchen island, her fingertips lingering longer than necessary. We're trying to help, she said. It's not about control, Coraline. It's about your well-being. You're not getting any younger, and sometimes the things we cling to, well, they hold us back more than they lift us up. I stared at her. Really stared. The kind of stare that measured not just her words, but what she refused to say aloud. I remember when you first came to our church, I said softly. You cried through the whole sermon. You told me afterward you felt seen. Do you remember that? She blinked. That was a long time ago. It was, I said, but God doesn't keep time like we do. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the clock. I should go. Daniel wants to finalize the property taxes this week. Is that what you call it now? I asked. She didn't answer, just reached for the door and paused long enough to say, You're not being reasonable. I watched her drive off from the kitchen window, the small succulent still sitting on my table, like a metaphor too lazy to finish its sentence. That night, I wrote a letter to my attorney, an official request to review the old will and draft a new one that included a clause explicitly stating that no relative may challenge or redirect charitable bequests due to presumed cognitive decline without two independent medical evaluations and written spiritual consent. It was a strange thing to write, but it felt like armor. The next morning, I received a text from Daniel. No greeting, no question, just a screenshot of a calendar notification, Mom's estate meeting. TB. I didn't reply. Instead, I slipped on my coat, grabbed Paul's letter, and walked out to the mailbox. There was a newsletter from the church. I opened it on the porch and smiled faintly at the name of the sermon planned for Sunday, Ashamed of Light. I folded it into my coat pocket and stepped inside, the screen door closing behind me with a satisfying click. It had been over 2 years since I last stepped inside the church. Not because I'd lost faith, but because the sanctuary never felt the same, without Paul's arm brushing mine. I used to sit beside him, always one hand resting on his knee, his Bible open, mine marked with bookmarks and memory. After the funeral, I sat in the same pew once, alone, and when no one filled the silence beside me, I left and never returned. But that Sunday morning, I put on my best skirt, the navy one with the tiny blue flowers and the loosened hem that only I knew about, and buttoned a cardigan over my blouse. I brushed my short gray curls twice and clipped on my mother's old brooch, then tucked Paul's letter into my handbag along with the church bulletin from the mailbox. I didn't wear perfume. The sanctuary smelled of dust and lilies. It didn't need competition. The parking lot was full when I arrived, just as I remembered it, families getting out of minivans, toddlers crying because their coats itched, teenagers pretending not to be there. I didn't recognize many faces anymore. But that didn't matter. I wasn't here to be recognized. Inside, the ushers were younger. One offered me a program and smiled. Welcome. Not welcome back, just welcome. That stung less than I expected. I didn't sit in my old pew. I found a spot in the back row, 2 seats from the aisle, and held my purse in my lap like a shield. The lights above the altar were brighter than they used to be, or maybe my eyes were more sensitive now. But when the choir stood and the first note of the opening hymn hit the air, I forgot every reason I'd stayed away. The song wasn't one of the old ones. No, Be Thou My Vision, or It Is Well. It was newer, something I didn't know. But Ava would have liked it. The lyrics spoke of restoration, of truth buried under silence, of fire that refused to go out. Halfway through the sermon, I saw Naomi across the aisle. She caught my eye and smiled, then turned back to the pulpit without calling attention to me. That was grace. Quiet and intact. Pastor Simmons wasn't the same man who baptized Paul or who prayed with me after Daniel's fever broke at age 9. But he had a calm authority, and when he spoke of being ashamed of light, I felt each word land where it was meant. The world will always try to cover what it doesn't understand, he said. Sometimes it does so gently, with politeness, with careful language. It will say, "You're too devout," or "You've had your time," or "Let someone younger speak now." But light is not seasonal. Light doesn't expire. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I felt seen anyway. After the service, I waited until most had filed out before I made my way to the front. Naomi met me halfway and pulled me into a gentle hug. "You're here," she said. "I'm here. I saved your old chair at Women of the Word. We still keep it by the window. I didn't promise I'd return, but I didn't say no." I walked home slowly, letting the sidewalk guide me. The sky was overcast, the kind that never breaks into rain but keeps everything quiet. I liked that kind of sky. It made space for thinking. When I turned onto my street, I saw Ava sitting on the porch swing. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon, One of mine, I realized from the sewing basket. She was holding my Bible open in her lap and had her shoes off, toes curled against the wood, like she needed to feel grounded. I didn't know you were coming, I said, as I stepped up the porch steps. She looked up and grinned. Dad thinks I'm at choir practice. You're not in the choir. She shrugged. I might be now. I sat beside her, the swing creaking softly beneath us. She held up a passage, finger tracing underlined words in red ink. I like this one, she said. Luke 12:3. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight. That was Paul's favorite, I whispered. He used to say it was the verse that made him stop lying to himself. We sat there in silence, for a long time, the pages between us, fluttering in the breeze. Ava didn't need to tell me what was going on at home. I could read it in her silence, the way she lingered longer, the questions she no longer asked. She was waking up to truths the way I had, except she was doing it with fewer years and more strength than I'd had at her age. I recorded something, she said finally. I looked at her. I wasn't spying, but last week I heard Mom talking to a lawyer on the phone about you and the will. My stomach didn't drop like it used to. It simply settled. I have it saved, just in case. She said, if you keep going with this holy act, she'll have to take it into her own hands. I closed the Bible slowly and placed my hand over hers. I'm not afraid, I said. You should be, she whispered. No, they should. That night, I wrote a second letter, this one not to the lawyer, but to Ava. I sealed it in an envelope marked with the date and tucked it behind the old photo of Paul and me from our 25th anniversary. It would wait for her, just in case I ever couldn't explain it myself. And I sat back down, at my desk, opened the new draft of my will, and started reviewing the final clauses with a calmness I hadn't known in years. It no longer felt like defense. It felt like building a boundary that would outlive their denial. The envelope Ava handed me the next morning was unmarked, but her hands trembled when she passed it across the table. It's not a full recording, she said. Just enough to prove I wasn't making it up. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I poured her a glass of orange juice, real juice, not the watery boxed kind Leah insisted was healthier, and let her talk while the light crept across the tile floor in the kitchen. She was talking to someone named Vic, Ava said. She kept saying things like, we need to show she's declining, and faith fixation can sometimes be interpreted as cognitive narrowing. She used that phrase. I wrote it down. I looked at her. You know what it means. Not really. It's when someone pretends belief is a symptom of slipping, not standing, I said. Eva's lips twisted, then flattened. I reached for the envelope. Inside was a USB drive, one of those cheap plastic ones with no label. I turned it in my fingers a few times before setting it down beside the salt shaker. Does your father know you took this? She shook her head. I didn't want him to stop me. That part hurt more than I let show. I remembered Daniel, at her age, wide-eyed, hopeful, the kind of boy who asked if God listened faster when you spoke in whispers. And now, here was his daughter, hiding evidence from him like he might be the storm, not the shelter. I didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the back room, Paul's old office, now a dusty collection of boxes and framed photos no one bothered to dust but me. I opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the one he'd always locked, though I'd long since found the spare key taped under his Bible. There, still wrapped in plastic, was the black leather notebook we'd bought on our last vacation to Maine. He said he wanted to start writing a family testimony, a written history of faith, to pass down. He wrote 3 pages before he got sick. I brought it back to the table, sat down across from Ava, and flipped it open. Do you know what this is? She shook her head. It's unfinished, I said. But it was meant for you. She leaned forward, eyes scanning the neat script of her grandfather's looping handwriting. Read it to me, she asked. So I did. I read the first 2 pages aloud, voice catching in places I thought had long since scarred over. To our granddaughter, if you're reading this, then God kept you curious. And that's enough. Faith doesn't require the loudest person in the room. It requires the quiet one who keeps showing up anyway. Ava's eyes glistened. Grandma, we have to do something. I nodded. I already have. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I explained that the will was being rewritten, that clauses were in place, and that I had begun gathering documentation. I even showed her the letter I'd started to draft to Pastor Simmons, asking him to act as a character witness should things escalate. But they'll say you're unstable, Ava whispered, or confused. They might. What do we do if they try to prove it? I thought for a moment, then said, we show them what clarity looks like. The rest of the morning passed in quiet purpose. Ava helped me clean out the sunroom. We took photos of my bookshelf, my reading chair, my old notebooks filled with sermon notes, and grocery lists alike. Everything with my handwriting, my dates, my decisions, evidence. I labeled each one, scanned a copy, and placed it all in a folder marked contingency, witness of faith. Later that afternoon, I met with an attorney, not Alan, my usual, but a younger woman named Meredith Stowe. She'd been recommended by Naomi, who said she was not only sharp, but had a special practice around elder legal abuse. Her office was small and sunlit, tucked between a dentist and a music store. Meredith listened, without interrupting, as I explained the sudden concern my family had shown about my mental sharpness, the recent hiding of personal items, and their fixation on the will. She took notes quickly, eyes never drifting far from mine. When I handed her the flash drive Ava had given me, she held it delicately, as if she understood its weight even before hearing the contents. Is it your granddaughter's voice we'll hear? She asked. Yes. And you consent to her involvement being part of any legal defense? I do. Meredith nodded. This is the kind of case I see more and more, but not often with someone as prepared as you, Mrs. Whitfield. I've had a long time to listen. Before I left, she gave me a document to review, a statement of competence, signed and notarized by her office and witnessed by 2 employees. It described in legal terms that I had demonstrated coherent memory, consistent timelines, spiritual reasoning, and an organized estate plan with clear intent. I'll keep the original, she said, but I suggest you leave a copy in plain sight. For who? She smiled slightly. For whoever comes looking for permission to interfere. I walked home slower, this time. Not because of my age, but because I felt the gravity of what was being put into motion. It was no longer a private pain or a quiet dismissal. It was documented. It was named. And that changes everything. That evening, I sat in the sunroom again, alone. Ava had gone home. The drive was safely backed up in 3 places. My papers were scanned and stored. The statement of competence sat on the coffee table beside a candle I'd lit, not for ambience, but as witness, and I began to write again. This time not to lawyers or pastors or even to Ava, but to myself. I wrote, "You are not losing clarity, you are reclaiming it. If they say otherwise, let this be witnessed." I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. It was still early, light hadn't fully touched the edges of the curtains yet, but I knew that sound. The front driveway, where the small stones shifted under shoes that didn't belong. I listened from my bed, still as breath, and heard the low murmur of voices, male and female, not arguing, coordinating. By the time I reached the hallway, Daniel and Leah were already inside. They didn't knock. Leah stood just inside the foyer, holding a coffee tray, and wearing a coat too thin for the weather. Daniel had that stiff look he wore when he thought he was being reasonable. I stayed at the far end of the hall waiting, letting them speak first. They did. "You're here early," I said, voice unraised. Daniel looked at me, as if surprised I'd spoken. "We didn't mean to startle you," he said. "We thought it might be good to talk, without distractions." I didn't move from my place near the archway to the kitchen. "Distractions? You've been busy. Lawyers, files, meetings," Leah said, stepping forward. "We just want to make sure everything's okay. Spiritually, mentally." There it was. "Everything is fine," I replied. Leah extended the coffee cup as if it were peace. "We brought your favorite, hazelnut." I didn't reach for it. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, this isn't about control. It's about concern. You're isolated. You've stopped involving us in decisions. You've given Ava things she doesn't understand yet. She understands more than you think." He looked away. Leah's mouth pressed into a thin smile, the kind that was more posture than feeling. "Can we sit down?" she asked. "I didn't ask you to come in." Daniel gave a quick glance toward the sunroom. "I saw the papers on the table," he said. "The folder, the notarized document." "What are you doing?" "I'm protecting myself. From us." I didn't answer. Leah stepped forward again. We're your family, Coraline. We've helped with everything since Paul passed. You know that. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. I looked at her. Really looked. Behind the foundation and the smile, she was tired. Not from grief. Not from caring. From resistance. From the fact that her shaping of this story wasn't working the way she'd planned. I've made arrangements, I said calmly. Everything is documented. Every transfer. Every conversation. And every time you've moved something in this house without asking me. Leah blinked. That's not fair. But it's true. Daniel stepped forward then, hand tightening around the coffee cup. I don't want this to get ugly, he said. It already is. I mean legally. Then you should have considered that before talking to someone about my capacity behind my back. His jaw twitched. You've changed, he said. No, I said. You stopped seeing me. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic, it was dry, unsentimental. The kind of silence that forms when someone's realizing a door has closed. I'm drafting a trust, I continued. The house, the savings, the remainder of your father's pension, all of it will go to a charitable foundation when I pass. Leah took a slow breath. And Ava? Ava will be given stewardship rights once she's of age. Not ownership. Not access. Responsibility. Daniel's face hardened. You're doing this to punish us. No, I'm doing this because you made my faith a problem to be solved. That landed. Leah didn't speak again. She stood, arms crossed, eyes flitting around the house like she was cataloging what was slipping away. Daniel lingered. His hand opened, as if to place the coffee on the side table, but then thought better of it. He left the cup on the floor instead. They walked out without saying goodbye. I didn't watch them go. I went to the sunroom and lit the candle again. The folder hadn't moved. The Bible still lay open, bookmarked by the note Ava had written last year for my birthday. Thank you for showing me what belief looks like in real life. I sat in Paul's chair. I wasn't shaking. Not even angry. Just clean. That afternoon, I got a call from Meredith. The new will was ready for review. She'd included everything: Ava's future stewardship, the faith clause, the protective measures for undue influence. Do you want to include the recordings? She asked. No, I said. Not unless they force my hand. There was a knock at the door around 4 o'clock. Not Daniel. Not Leah. Naomi. She brought pie, the kind with the buttery crust and tart cranberries she used to make every December. She didn't ask what happened. She just placed it on the kitchen counter and poured 2 glasses of water. I saw them drive off, she said. Leah looked like she was biting her own tongue. She's not used to being told no. Naomi smiled gently. Neither was her mother. We sat at the table, 2 old women in a kitchen that had weathered generations, sipping water and splitting pie like the piece it was. Do you need anything? She asked. I shook my head. I have enough, I said. For once, I really do. Before she left, Naomi placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. Women of the Word is hosting a testimony night next week. No pressure, just thought you might want a seat. I kept the paper, didn't promise anything. But something, in me, knew I would go. That evening, I put the hazelnut coffee in the sink and watched it drain without touching my lips. I wanted nothing from their hands anymore. And I wrote one more letter, this time to the foundation attorney, to confirm the name I wanted etched on the documents. The Grace Whitfield Fund. Because what they called shame, I called survival. And what they feared, I had finally embraced. There are things only the body remembers. Not in the conscious way, like a recipe or a birthday, but the slow, cellular kind. The way a pew creaks when you shift forward to pray. The way the wooden pulpit sounds under a hand's gentle knock before someone speaks, or the scent of old hymnals mixing with the faint sweetness of perfume and pencil sharpenings on a Thursday night. Women of the Word hadn't changed much in the 15 years I'd been gone. Same circle of folding chairs, same quilted banners on the wall, stitched with verses, and the same corner by the window, my old seat, now dusted and waiting, just as Naomi said it would be. I'd arrived early, tucked Paul's leather-bound notebook under my arm, and chose not to hide in the back. A few women recognized me. A few didn't. No one questioned why I'd returned. They just nodded, smiled, and handed me a small index card with a single line, written across the top, "Where have you seen Grace this year?" I read it 3 times before setting it down on my lap. Where had I seen Grace? In Ava's quiet hands, holding truth like something breakable, in Naomi's pie, in the way Pastor Simmons didn't force familiarity, in the silence of Daniel's retreat, in my own refusal to drink the coffee they brought like an offering laced with ownership. The women began sharing stories. Simple things. A neighbor who'd mowed a lawn without being asked. A letter from a grandchild who'd finally said sorry. A medical scare that turned out to be nothing. Laughter peppered the room gently, and tears were welcomed without apology. When it came my turn, I didn't stand. I just cleared my throat and spoke from my chair. I lost my Bible recently, I said. Not to theft, not to fire, to family. The room quieted. They didn't throw it away. That would have been too obvious. They moved it, hid it, tucked it away in a linen closet under towels like it was something shameful. And when I found it, they told me I didn't need it anymore, that I'd earned rest, that I should let go of things that make life heavy. A few women bowed their heads. One reached discreetly for a tissue. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. But I remembered something Paul once told me when he was sick. He said, "Faith is the only thing that gets heavier when you don't carry it." That got a few quiet nods. I've been quiet a long time, I said. Not just since Paul died. Long before that too. I let the rhythm of obligation replace the rhythm of belief. But lately, I've been reading scripture like it's the only thing keeping my memory honest. And I've found that silence doesn't protect anyone. It only delays the truth. I looked around the circle. Not a single woman had turned away. I rewrote my will this year. I've named a foundation, in honor of grace. I've documented every word, every date, every moment they tried to twist concern into control. And when they said I was too old to believe, I wrote down the proof that I still could. The room stayed still for a few breaths. Then Naomi said, "Let the record show, she remembers just fine." There were chuckles. There were amens. And there was a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt since I'd spoken at Paul's memorial. After the group ended, a woman I didn't know approached me. She had soft hands, younger than mine, but with the same kind of weariness in her eyes. "My daughter says faith is a performance," she said. "She calls it superstition." I touched her wrist. "Then show her that peace is the real performance. It just doesn't ask for applause." She nodded and left without needing more. That night, back at home, I made tea from the loose lavender I'd been saving in a tin, labeled Sunday only. I opened Paul's notebook again and added a few more lines in my own writing, just under his last entry. I spoke. They listened. And the roof didn't fall in. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. And clarity, I was learning, is what scares people who rely on confusion to gain control. At nearly 9, the doorbell rang. Once. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe Naomi or a neighbor with leftover casserole. It was Ava. No coat, just a sweatshirt, and mismatched gloves. Her breath visible in the cold. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "You weren't expected." "I know, but I wanted to give you this." She handed me a small envelope, sealed with tape, my name written in blue ink, her handwriting. "What is it?" "Insurance," she said, "just in case." I stepped aside, letting her in. She warmed her hands by the radiator while I opened it. Inside was a printout of an email, from Leah, addressed to a man named Victor, same one Ava had mentioned before. Subject: urgency on will adjustment, before decline is documented. The email outlined strategy, language like soft psychological repositioning, and using Ava as emotional leverage, terms so clinical they read like instructions for defusing a bomb. I sat down, quietly, not shaken, just validated. "You read it?" I asked. "I did. I printed it at school. I hid the original." I looked at her, this small witness with a quiet storm inside her. "You shouldn't have had to carry this." I wasn't carrying it alone. No, she wasn't. Not anymore. I tucked the letter into the same file folder Meredith had labeled protective evidence and locked it in the drawer behind the sewing table. Then I looked at Ava and said, "I think you've earned your place." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Your name will stay on the stewardship clause, but I'm adding something else." I pulled a sticky note from the fridge and wrote 6 words. "Ava Whitfield, witness to Grace, co-executor." "Co-executor?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. They underestimated the child in the room. I won't. The next time Daniel came by, he knocked. That alone told me something had changed. He stood there with both hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the wind. There was no tray of coffee this time, no pretense of visiting out of care. I didn't ask him to come in. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been occupied." He nodded, then glanced toward the driveway, where Leah sat in the passenger seat of their car, arms folded, face turned toward the window. She didn't look at us. Daniel cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize for the tone, the assumption." "That's not an apology," I said gently. He blinked. "What you said wasn't a tone. It was an effort. And what you called assumptions were decisions. I was trying to prevent a mess. You became the mess." He shifted, jaw tense. "We don't want this to get ugly. I've already made it clear. I'm not interested in ugliness. I'm interested in truth." He exhaled, quick and shallow. "Is Ava here?" he asked. "She's not yours to retrieve." That landed. He wasn't used to hearing no from me, at least not without explanation, a softened edge, or a footnote of guilt. "I know about the stewardship clause," he said. "And the co-executor. Then you know she's earned it. She's a child, and you underestimated her, as you did me." He didn't answer, just looked past me, toward the edge of the porch where the wind stirred the dormant rosemary bush. "You're going to destroy this family's legacy," he muttered. "You're cutting us out like we never existed." "No," I said calmly. "I'm preventing you from rewriting mine." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is righteous, but it's vindictive. I think it's documented." He flinched, just slightly, and I knew then that he'd read the email Eva had printed, the one Leah sent, the one that made their intentions hard to dress up as concern. "I didn't sign off on that," he said, "but you didn't stop it." A long silence followed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if no sentence would hold without unraveling. "I thought we were closer than this," he finally said. "We were," I replied, "before you mistook access for entitlement." His shoulders sagged a little. There was something boyish in that slump, a trace of the child who used to ask me to hold his nightmares at bay. But I didn't reach for him. That instinct was gone. "You've made your position clear," he said. "But Leah, she won't back off. I thought if I came here, I could reason with you first." "Reason isn't what she's after," I said. "Control it." He nodded, slowly, painfully. And for a moment, I believed he wasn't here to fight. "I don't know what to do anymore," he said. "Start with confession," I said, "to yourself. Then try humility. That's a harder one." I didn't mean to sound cruel, and maybe I didn't, but he didn't argue. "I'm sorry," he said again. This time, it sounded more like a truth. He turned and walked down the steps without waiting for a reply. I watched him get into the car, speak to Leah without looking at her, then start the engine. They didn't drive off right away. She turned toward the house once. But I didn't flinch. I simply stood there, a still frame against the wind, until they pulled away. When I stepped back inside, the warmth of the house surprised me. I'd forgotten how cold the outside air had been. I sat in the living room for a while without doing anything. No reading, no filing, just listening to the tick of the wall clock. Paul once claimed was 10 minutes too slow, but refused to fix because time shouldn't feel too precise. After dinner, I opened the envelope from Meredith that had arrived that morning. Inside was the revised trust agreement. Legal language, notarized lines, and all the necessary protections. I'd reviewed it 3 times before signing. But now, it was official. I placed it in the metal lockbox and sat down at my desk. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I began writing a sermon. Not one to be preached, not one for a pulpit, just a message for Ava. A future letter, broken into verses and reflections, in case I ever couldn't be there to answer her questions about why I did what I did. Why the house was sold. Why her name appeared beside mine. Because truth without witness fades. Because legacy is not property. Because faith is louder when lived than when framed. And then I added, because silence becomes sin when we let it excuse harm. When I finally looked up from the page, the hour was late, the house was quiet, and for once, I didn't dread it. I walked through each room that night, touching the corners with my eyes, not to grieve, not to memorize, but to bless. My hand rested on the window frame in Paul's old study, then on the banister Ava once slid down in a Christmas dress 2 sizes too big. I paused in front of the sewing closet, now locked, and whispered, "No one will take this from you." And then I returned to the sunroom and sat with the candle. I lit it again, not for prayer this time, but to mark something finished. Not the fight, but the fear. The following Monday passed, without a phone call, a knock, or an email from Daniel or Leah. The silence felt engineered, as if they'd stepped back, not out of remorse, but in preparation for something else. I'd seen enough courtroom dramas to recognize the stillness before a strategic strike. I didn't reach out. I didn't alert Meredith. I simply went about my day, letting the rhythm of small, faithful tasks anchor me. Pruning the rosemary bush Daniel had ignored, tidying the linen shelf where my Bible had once been hidden, and cataloging one last photo album from the years before Paul got sick. Each action reminded me that peace isn't passive, it's protective. By evening, the quiet deepened. I read the same verse twice, not because I'd forgotten it, but because it was the kind that asked to be read more slowly the second time. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Around 9, my phone lit up with a notification. Unknown number. I didn't answer, but they left a voicemail. When I pressed play, the voice on the other end didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. I recognized the clipped tone and shallow warmth in Leah's cadence anywhere. "We've scheduled a mediation hearing. You'll receive papers by the end of the week. This doesn't have to go to court, Coraline, but we need clarity. You've made changes under duress and misinformation. We're only trying to protect what's rightfully Daniel's." The words were civil, the message was not. She hadn't said anything about Ava. That omission spoke louder than the rest. I deleted the voicemail and placed the phone screen down on the table. For a long while, I just sat there, letting the shadows from the candlelight stretch across the wall, letting the weight of the threat settle without tipping me off balance. This was never just about money. It was about narrative, control, the comfort of being able to say, "She left it to us. She trusted us." They wanted the ending to come wrapped in gratitude. My resistance threatened to make their story fall apart. 2 days later, the packet arrived by courier. I was in the garden when the knock came. When I opened the door, the delivery man offered a padded envelope with my name printed in bold letters, "No return address." I signed. He didn't meet my eyes. Back inside, I set the envelope on the counter, washed the soil from my hands, and dried them slowly. I knew better than to open something important with dirt under my nails. The envelope contained 3 documents. 1, a formal request for mediation over the distribution of assets, citing concern for the mental state of the primary party. 2, a proposed revision of the will drafted by an attorney I'd never met. 3, a brief statement from Daniel, claiming I had reversed financial decisions without proper oversight and demonstrated increasing paranoia about religious influence. It was underlined. That word, paranoia. I stared at it for a long time. Paul had once told me that words are the easiest way to sanitize cruelty. You don't have to hurt someone physically when you can reframe their certainty as delusion. I placed the papers neatly back in the envelope and brought it straight to the sewing room. I slid it into the fireproof box beside my notarized documents, then closed the latch with care. Then I called Meredith. Her voice was steady. "We expected this," she said. She asked me to forward scanned copies. I did. When she called back later that evening, she had a plan already formed: file a statement of opposition, supply the witness recordings from Ava, and request a mental capacity evaluation on my terms from a doctor of my choice. "I'll have my staff begin compiling the response tomorrow morning," she said. "Do you want me to notify the church about what's happening?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's see if they're still hoping I'll stay quiet." "Coraline," she added gently, "they're not underestimating you anymore." "No," I said. "That's why they're escalating." That night, I didn't write. I didn't reread verses or organize documents. I just opened the window in the sunroom, sat in the chair Paul once fixed with wood glue and wire, and listened to the wind move through the trees. It carried something deeper than sound. It carried memory. I thought of the first time Daniel stood behind a pulpit at age 12, trembling but proud, reading from the book of Psalms with more faith than understanding. He had asked me if God listened better when your voice cracked. I'd said yes. Now his voice hadn't cracked in years. But mine would if I let it. So I didn't. Instead, I closed the window, turned off the light, and went to bed with the same prayer I'd whispered at Paul's bedside the night before he passed. Let the truth be louder than the fear they project. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. Not a courtroom hearing, not yet, but a mediation, a quiet proceeding meant to resolve things peacefully, as if betrayal ever shook hands with peace. It would be held in a neutral office space downtown, in a room with a polished table, a mediator in a gray suit, and someone behind a laptop taking notes as if all this were routine. I wore blue, a dress Paul had bought me for our anniversary years ago. It was simple and soft, with a faded hem and a waistline that had grown more forgiving over the years. I added my pearl earrings and polished my shoes with a hand towel until they stopped looking neglected. The cross necklace stayed, of course. The only thing I would have fought to wear if someone told me I couldn't. Meredith met me on the sidewalk outside the building. She was dressed in black, with a tan leather briefcase and that clipped, calm voice that lawyers seem to practice somewhere between courtroom doors and whispered settlements. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I'm already finished," I said. "They're the ones catching up." Inside, the space was colder than it needed to be. Not physically, but atmospherically. White walls, gray carpet, silent staff, who never looked up from their screens, like everything had been vacuumed, of warmth. Daniel and Leah were already seated when we arrived. Daniel nodded politely, hollow and careful. Leah didn't look at me. She stared at a stack of papers in front of her as if they were shields, not statements. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Janice, explained the format. No shouting, no finger-pointing, just facts and intentions. Her voice was professional, but not unkind. They went first. Leah read from a prepared sheet, her voice steady, her eyes never rising. She described an alarming shift in behavior, withdrawal from family dialogue, and sudden large estate adjustments made under ideological strain. She used the word manipulation twice. She mentioned Ava once, as a minor under undue influence. Daniel's contribution was softer. A story about wanting stability for his daughter, about growing up in a home of scripture and steadiness, and fearing that what had been sacred was now being weaponized. When they finished, Janice turned to me. I didn't bring paper, just the notebook. The one Paul had started and I had finished. I opened it to the last page and laid it on the table. "I was never confused," I said, "and faith is not a symptom." Janice nodded. "Do you wish to respond directly to their concerns?" I smiled at her gently. Only if facts need replacing. So I told the story, not as defense, but as record. I spoke of the Bible hidden in a closet under dish towels, the robe I didn't ask for, the email Ava had intercepted, with language not of concern, but strategy. I listed dates, when I contacted the lawyer, when the documents were revised, when Leah brought coffee that went cold without being touched. I quoted from my will, not out of pride, but out of clarity. No inheritance shall be distributed to individuals who have attempted to distort or obstruct spiritual liberty. Meredith added evidence at appropriate intervals, a letter from Pastor Simmons verifying my state of clarity, a notarized statement from Ava explaining her involvement, screenshots from emails, and the prior will for comparison. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't even look at Leah until the very end. She had stopped writing. Daniel had stopped pretending not to shift in his seat. Janice asked if a compromise could be considered. I answered before Meredith could. "I've compromised plenty," I said. "I compromised when I let silence answer instead of truth. I compromised when I didn't speak up the first time. They erased something sacred. This will is not punishment. It's a record, and a record cannot be altered just because someone doesn't like what it remembers." There was no dramatic end to the meeting. Janice said she would compile her report, forward recommendations, and notify all parties within 2 weeks. Leah left without a word. Daniel paused long enough to murmur, "You didn't have to do it like this." "I didn't," I said, "but I did." Meredith and I walked out to the parking lot in silence. At the edge of the sidewalk, a gust of wind lifted a dried oak leaf and sent it tumbling across the concrete. I watched it catch against Leah's discarded copy of the trust summary, forgotten in a rush of frustration, and I didn't bother telling her she'd dropped it. By the time we pulled into my driveway, dusk was settling like a quiet prayer. Meredith carried my file inside. We made tea. Black for her, mint for me, and she set the documents back in my drawer, as if sealing a chapter shut. Before she left, she turned to me. "You do know this might not be the last time, right?" "I know," I said. "And you're still not afraid?" "I've lived too long to be afraid of people who try to scare me with paperwork." She smiled at that. After she left, I sat on the front steps with my tea in hand, watching the wind pick up again. The rosemary bush bowed slightly, the porch swing creaked once, then settled. I thought about the word Leah had used, etiological strain, as if belief were a fracture. But the only strain I felt now was the effort it took to remain silent for so long. Now, the silence was mine, and I had repurposed it. The letter came 2 weeks later. No knock, no phone call, just a white envelope slid through the mail slot, early in the morning. I found it on the front rug beside my walking shoes, half bent where it had caught on the wood trim. It bore the letterhead of the mediation office. Beneath the official seal was my name, printed without embellishment. I took it into the kitchen and set it on the counter while I made tea. I didn't rush to open it. I had learned that peace wasn't something you tore into. It arrived slowly, on the other side of patience. When the kettle whistled, I turned it off, poured the water, and finally sat down with the envelope. The mediator's report was short. 4 pages, stapled, once in the corner. The conclusion came on the second page. The party identified as Coraline Whitfield has demonstrated consistent clarity, legal preparedness, and spiritual self-agency. No evidence of coercion or impairment was found. The estate decisions appeared deliberate and well documented. Further contesting would lack merit and may risk civil countersuit under elder protection statutes. I read the paragraph twice, not because I doubted it, but because I'd never seen my faith described in such clean, procedural language. Spiritual self-agency. I folded the letter carefully, not triumphant, but grounded. Meredith had been right. There wouldn't be a dramatic finish, just a steady one. Paper after paper sealing what could no longer be stolen, hidden, or dressed up as affection. I left the letter on the table and returned to my sewing closet. I hadn't touched the machine in months, but today I wanted my hands to move. I wanted thread to do what words couldn't. I pulled out an old cotton panel and began stitching the initials GW into a corner. Grace Whitfield. The name of the fund. Paul would have smiled at that. He used to say that some names were more legacy than label. Grace wasn't my middle name, but it was the one I'd chosen to give away. As I stitched, I remembered the day I decided to create it. It was after a service for a woman named Edna, who had passed quietly in her nursing home, alone, with a son who rarely visited and a church that hadn't known how much she once gave. After her funeral, someone had said, "She never made much of a fuss," and it had struck me like a slap. How easily women like us disappeared into silence, into courtesy, into giving things away, our time, our names, our memories, without ever writing it down. So now, Grace was written down, a trust in her name and mine, a name stitched into a cloth that would outlast the weather of their denial. Later that afternoon, Naomi called. "I heard," she said without preamble. "Daniel's sister-in-law mentioned it. They won't be challenging the will. Leah's mortified, said you embarrassed the family." She embarrassed herself. "Well, yes, but your silence seems to be louder than her defense." I smiled faintly. "That was the point." "I know," Naomi said. "Still, when are you telling Ava?" "Tomorrow," I said. "She has a youth gathering tonight. She'll be proud." "She already is." After we hung up, I stood in the living room for a long time, staring at the old bookshelf Paul built with his hands. It held the Bible I'd reclaimed, the notebook I'd finished, and a few worn devotionals with pages dog-eared by more than time. I thought of everything that had been taken without asking. Books, space, voice, and I thought of what I'd taken back. My name. My will. My inheritance, not just of finances, but of faith. Just after dinner, as the light folded low behind the treetops, a car pulled up to the curb. I heard the door shut, quiet and careful. Then footsteps. A knock followed, polite, restrained. When I opened the door, Daniel stood on the step alone. No coat, no documents, just him. "I saw the report," he said. "I assumed you would. I won't contest it." "I know." He stood there, eyes downcast, the same posture he had as a boy when he accidentally broke my ceramic vase and couldn't find the courage to confess. I was wrong, he said finally. I know that too. He looked up then. Really looked. You don't hate me? I never did. He exhaled, and for the first time in months, his shoulders dropped, not in defense, but in release. I just thought, he paused. I thought it would all pass. That you'd soften. I did, I said, but not the way you expected. He nodded. Can I come in? No, I said gently. Not tonight. He hesitated, then gave a small, accepting nod. Will I see you again? That's not up to me, I said. That's up to your capacity to listen next time. He didn't argue. He simply turned and walked back to the car. When I closed the door, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. Instead, I pulled the stitched panel from the sewing table, folded it neatly, and placed it in the lockbox with the original deed and will. One day, someone would open it, not to revise, but to remember. Ava arrived before sunset, the next day. She didn't knock. She knew by now that the back door was always unlocked for her. I heard her sneakers pause on the tile before she called out, I'm home, and something in me softened at the sound, not because she belonged to the house. She didn't. But because she belonged to the truth that had been buried and slowly unearthed again. In the sunroom, I called back. She appeared with her hair in a loose braid and a folder clutched under one arm. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her eyes were sharper than any youth pastor might be ready for. You didn't tell me you were going to the mediation, she said as she sat down. You already knew I would. She took a breath like she'd been holding it since Tuesday. And they lost. She smiled. But it wasn't gloating. She had seen too much by now to enjoy other people's shame. Dad hasn't said much, she said. He's quieter at dinner. Mom's been on her phone a lot, whispering. Silence doesn't always mean peace. I said. She nodded, then handed me the folder. I made this for you. Inside were pages, handwritten verses, copied out by Ava, in black ink, each with a sticky note beside it explaining why she chose it. Psalm 27:1. Because you weren't afraid when they tried to make you small. Isaiah 46:4, because you showed me what strength looks like when the world says you're done. Proverbs 31:25, because dignity isn't loud, it just doesn't flinch. I read each one, slowly. When I looked up, her face had gone still. I don't know if I'll always believe the same way you do, she said, but I want to believe the way you walk. You don't have to be me, I said, but you do need to know who you are when someone else tries to name you. She blinked fast, then slower. Do you want to come with me tonight? She asked. To where? I smiled. I'll come, but I might not be quiet. She grinned at that. That's fair. We left just after 6. The church glowed from within like it always did in winter, the yellow lights spilling out through the stained glass like softened resolve. Inside, the sanctuary had been rearranged, no pews, just folding chairs in a wide circle. At the front, a mic stood on a slim black stand beside a wooden cross. Eva introduced me to her friends, most too shy to make eye contact. One girl whispered, "Is this your grandma?" with a reverence I wasn't used to. I sat in the second row, not in the back, not in the center, just close enough to see Eva when she walked to the front. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need to. She spoke plainly, but her voice never wavered. People say testimony means telling what God's done for you, she began. But sometimes, it's just telling the truth about what people tried to take from you and what He gave you back. She told them about a Bible that had been hidden, about a will that was nearly stolen, about a woman who stitched initials into fabric like it mattered what outlasted her. She didn't preach to me, Ava said. She let me sit beside her until I heard the silence differently. Do you think Dad really meant what he said when he came by? I think he's beginning to understand what it cost him not to. I'm still deciding, I said. She looked down into her tea. I'm sorry it got so bad. She nodded, her face quieter now, more rooted. Inside was the original bookmark from my Bible, the cross-stitched one she found and returned months ago. I want you to keep it, I said, not because it's sacred, but because it remembers. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She just held it like it was her turn to carry something forward. The morning after testimony night felt unusually still. Not the kind of quiet that follows conflict, but the kind that arrives when something has ended and no one needs to name it. There was no new letter, No voicemail, no family interruption waiting to steal the peace back. Ava had already left by the time I woke. She'd written a small note. "Thank you for letting me speak," and left it beside her folded blanket on the couch. The cross-stitched bookmark was gone from the table, tucked safely now in the pages of a younger faith. I sat with my tea in the sunroom, Bible open on my lap, and let the words rise slowly. "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." There was nothing dramatic left to fight, nothing to defend, only something to carry. It was a Thursday when the letter from the foundation arrived. Attached was a confirmation of assets, the legal deed of transfer, and a list of programs they'd begin supporting in the next quarter: literacy for elder women, shelter funding for faith-based housing transitions, and scholarships for teenage girls pursuing theology in underserved schools. I touched the paper once, just to be sure it was real. Not because I doubted its legitimacy, but because seeing my husband's name and my chosen name, Paul and Grace Whitfield Charitable Trust, printed together like that made something eternal feel suddenly physical. Later that week, Naomi came by with a basket of lemons and a warm grin. "Saw the announcement in the bulletin," she said, letting herself in without knocking. "I didn't know they'd print it," I replied. "You didn't ask them not to," she said. "Which is a sign you're ready." We drank lemonade on the porch, while the sun slipped behind the trees. "You know," she said, "a lot of us have talked about starting something new. Women of the Word is still strong, but we've been thinking of something quieter, more personal." "What do you mean?" "Story circles, one Sunday a month, no agendas, just gathering in homes. Not to teach, not to fix, just to tell what's been survived." I liked the sound of that. "Would you host the first one?" she asked. I didn't need time to think. "Yes," I said, "but I won't lead it." "You already have," she replied. That night, I walked the house as I often did, stopping at the thresholds instead of going all the way in. Each room had carried something through this season: the kitchen where I read the mediation letter, the hallway where I first found the Bible missing, the sewing room where I signed away my fear one page at a time. When I reached Paul's study, I opened the drawer where the notebook was kept. I'd stopped writing in it, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the story had moved from page to practice. It no longer lived in ink, but in memory, in the language Ava spoke now, without needing instruction. I left the notebook where it was and closed the drawer gently. Then I returned to the sunroom, my chair waiting, and opened my Bible to the back inside cover. There, in faint pencil from years ago, Paul had written one line before he died. "If faith does not cost you something, it will not change you." That's what this had been. Not revenge. Not control. But cost. And now, clarity. 2 months later, the house sold. A woman named Rosa bought it. A retired nurse with silver hair and a kind voice. She said she loved the sunroom. Said it reminded her of her mother's reading nook. Said she wanted to plant mint and rosemary because scent holds stories longer than sound. I didn't cry when I handed her the keys. I'd already taken everything with me that couldn't be replaced. Letters, pages, the bookmark. Ava returned to me the day before closing. She said she didn't need it anymore. She said she had the verse memorized now. I believe her. I moved into a smaller place across town, a garden unit with a small yard and a brick stoop. Ava comes by every Sunday after service. Sometimes, Naomi joins us. Sometimes, it's just the sound of shared tea and silent knowing. I haven't rewritten my will since. I haven't needed to. They know now. And what I wrote in paper and prayer is enough.